You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
وتكلمين هناك لشوارزنيجر
Ya lo hace, pierna derecha, directo al arco, golazo, golazo, golazo.
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
There will be an outdoor soccer game in Canada on December 10th.
Yeah, it will be. I wish I would have been able to go to Seattle, though.
Yeah. Well, you know, Kevin and I
I can still go to Seattle, just not for a soccer game.
You can go, John. I was watching a documentary on Kurt Cobain the other day. You can go see the park that everyone signs their name at. You could maybe, I don't know what else. You can drink coffee. Seattle, I'm sure, is lovely. I've never been fortunate enough to make it to Seattle, but one day I probably will. I'd like to get to the Northwest. I've been to Vancouver before, so I don't need to see it again. I'll go down there at another time someday, but not this year. Toronto FC is in the MLS Cup final, having defeated the Montreal Impact 7-5 on aggregate. My God.
The most amount of goals ever in the MLS Cup playoff. And dare I say, the craziest, most intense two soccer games I have ever attended in my life. And that's including Estadio Azteca.
Yeah, and look, we're going to talk a lot more about this in the second, third, and fourth segment of today's show. So
Yes.
we've dedicated 45 minutes to this game today. We are going to do some other news stuff off the top to make sure that we get that out there. But certainly we will break this down a lot more. And next week, we're sort of doing our early planning for it. Kevin will be in Toronto from Thursday on, I believe. So we will be doing some more live shows probably on Thursday and Friday than we normally do. We'll have to see how that works out. We're both credited and approved for the MLS Cup final. Should be a good time. I put it out on Twitter last night. I'll say it again on this show that I'm inviting. I think Thursday will be a good day to have this. Any Seattle fans, any Seattle listeners that are in town are interested in having a neutral night, we'll call it. I think Thursday. Well, Kevin's going to be. He might be wearing rape green. I'm not sure, but it'll be yet. On Thursday. I think that we'll try and arrange something there. Maybe hopefully meet some people from out there. That is one of the nice things about an MLS Cup. I have been to one before. I've been to an All-Star game before. That's also good for that. This is going to be a bit different though with the TFC, the Toronto Football Club, involved in the activities. Still a little surreal to me, Kevin, but alas, we'll get your thoughts a little bit more. We'll just hold them for now. We're also going to open the lines up again today. Haven't done that in a while. If anyone wants to talk there, feel free to call in us at the bottom of the hour. Kevin, what's the number?
802-375-7445. 802-375-7445.
All right. So at the bottom of the hour, we'll open the lines up if you want to chat with us about anything you want in terms of the game. And we'll probably do that a few times next week as well if you want to have a chat. I'm also working on some other fan base stuff. I think it's going to be a combination of both because I've always been a guy that sort of tried to play both worlds in terms of the fan world and the serious media, we'll call it, world to try and understand that. And I think the fans have played such a vital and important role in TFC's history that I'm hoping to have and to speak to a few. I'm not saying this to dismiss them, but just regular fans, because I think they're a vital and important part of TC's history. And I think and I hope to include them in Soccer Today next week. But let's move to our bits and bytes now, Kevin. Off the top, this NASL news continues to move, and hopefully we will follow this next week as well. We're not going to ignore this side of it as well, because it is a major, major story, and it increasingly becomes more difficult to see how this league survives. A couple reports came out today from these meetings. One is that the New York Cosmos have reportedly lost $30 million since they were launched. I don't know how that's sustainable. It isn't sustainable, clearly, because this team is it's not quite in the ground yet, but I think that they're sizing it up, like the coffin size up, right?
Yep, they're taking measurements, they're digging holes, they're measuring twice and digging once, I could say. And yep, it doesn't look good for the Cosmos, yeah, especially in the last 3 days. A lot of reporting out there discussing the potential of no more Cosmos for the very, very near future.
And I am working on getting someone on the record for that I've been speaking to. We'll leave it at that, but hopefully they'll be able to talk candidly when I'm able to get them. I'm not going to bring them on until they can talk candidly because I don't want to put them in a difficult situation, but that's something that I've been working on for the last week. I don't know what more to say about that. I mean, if the Cosmos go, we've repeated this already a bunch of times. This league doesn't really. What is this league if the Cosmos go? I mean, the Cosmos kind of define it in a lot of ways, and I suppose Miami's still there, and Miami has the money behind it, so the Miami will take over that role as the big spending, freewheeling team in NESL. But if there's only 6 other opponents to play, what's the point? I mean, honestly, you're spending money for the sake of it without any hope.
And there's talks of the USL filling in. Maybe it was a presentation done to the USL of, okay, if it's not a merger, maybe we could just play you guys a couple games to make sure we have a calendar that's decent. What can we do? Yeah, it's at that level now. And you have teams like the Railhawks, who are rebranding as North Carolina FC, building a 20,000 stadium apparently and trying to gun for MLS. So a lot of pieces are moving in the North American soccer chess match right now.
Yeah, let's talk about that one too. We'll move past the Cosmos, as I said. I think that at this point in time, Kevin and I's opinion are out there enough that we'll wait till we get someone else's on there to talk about it. Maybe we'll talk to Lewis next week as well. There's so much to try and fit in with MLS Cup, but obviously this is an important story as well. The interlocking schedule stuff, I mean, if you're USL, you look at that and you go, come on, guys. Like, either you come or you don't. Like, the old saying about making a decision about what to do on the pod, right? That's kind of where you're at with this. And if you're USL, they have all the cards right now. They're about to be labeled D2. That's almost a sure thing that's going to happen on Monday. Why would they? I think if I'm USL, I look at a team like Indy, I look at Carolina, I look at markets like that, and I go, you're welcome to join us. We'll make room. Especially the Indy 11, I think, is someone that would be very attractive for them in terms of regional rivalries and stability in that. It's a good franchise with great fans. You'd want that team in there. So you look at Carolina, that's kind of an area that's important. There's some natural rivalries down there. The rest of them, you kind of go, yeah, Puerto Rico, they're going to say no to. Edmonton, they might say no to because of the distances. The rest of them, they'll probably take them on if they want them. Fort Lauderdale, yeah, that might be. They might suggest that they just cease operations. Miami, they're probably not interested in. They'll take who they want, and they're not going to be overly inclined to help a league that has pretty much done nothing but deride and bash them for years. The minor league stuff and your farm teams or whatever like that. That's all they've ever put them as. So I don't know. It's bleak times, and I feel for the fans, as I've said before, Kevin.
No, I do feel for the fans of the NASL too, Duane, and for certain teams. And you mentioned Miami FC. What's going to be for Miami FC? What's Edmonton's going to be? Future's going to be? So all those questions, we still don't have an answer. So, but North Carolina FC, why the rebrand? Why dismiss the history of the Railhawks in a basically, it's the optics or it's just a perception of the name. It's still going to be the organization, and with a new stadium, they want to go away from the affiliation of the Railhawks with lower league and move to North Carolina FC in the top league if it's possible.
Yeah, look, this is a case. We have reached the break. Okay, when they first started to have the quote unquote authentic or the derivative, if you want to be negative about them, names first started to come into North American soccer. It was at a point where I think a lot of people were self-conscious about the sort of minor league feel of North American soccer, and they thought that a good start would be kind of naming them teams more in their tradition or more in the traditional way that you see in other parts of the world. So, that's where Toronto FC's name comes from. They wanted to have a plain name and let a natural nickname evolve. Unfortunately, that natural nickname that evolved was the Reds, which was pretty damn lame. But at any rate, it's the Reds now, so we go with it. I think we've reached the breaking point on it, though, Kevin. North Carolina FC? Really? That's all. That's better than the Railhawks in your mind? A name that's kind of fun and I know it's that tradition North American city name nickname that a lot of soccer fans back in the day resisted. But I think we're almost at a breaking point now where most soccer fans would rather go back to the North American convention of naming and have like a funny name attached to it. Go Railhawks. I think that it's a mistake to lose that branding. I don't think it hurts them at all. Yeah. I guess, maybe the argument that they want to move away because they've always been a minor league team and have a perception that they're more of a major league side is there, I guess. But North Carolina,
I know you keep the Railhawks name, Duane. You keep the Carolina Railhawks, and you update the logo to a more tier 1 feel. That's what you could do. You can take the same identity of the club, but move it up a level. Update the logo, update the standards, update the feel of the team. You clean up lines. All you can do, but you keep the identity and you move it forward. You don't just go quote unquote bland and try to have something new when you might alienate a portion of the fan base by dismissing what they spent their hard-earned money and time supporting over the last few decades.
Yeah. If you really want to go generic, the North Carolina part of it, Railhawks FC. There you go. That's kind of a combination. You keep the name, but you drop the city altogether. Why not? That would be a little different. I think that would stand out. You can sort of identify with whatever part of that state that they wanted. It is a tradition in that state, like it is in Arizona, for instance, to try and brand or Minnesota as well. It's not Minneapolis, it's Minnesota. So that is a tradition in that part of the world where those teams tend to try and affiliate themselves with the entirety of the state rather than the city they're in, and that is useful. So you go Railhawks rather than North Carolina Football Club. I don't know. It's kind of boring at this point in time, particularly when you just stick the FC on it. Like not to be home centric here, but when TFC did it, they were the first to kind of do that in Major League Soccer, to just like ignore the nickname altogether. And that at the time, and this is actually going to tie into something I'm about to say. At the time, it was kind of unique. The other name that Toronto FC almost became, and this was actually a trademarked brand. They trademarked 3 or 4 of them, like they're apt to do nowadays, and then it's sort of to hide what the actual name is going to be, and also to sort of give them options leading up to it. And this one was the one that leaked first. And if you go back on Big Soccer and you know what my handle is, you can find me literally claiming that if they named the team this, that I would not buy tickets. That's how angry this name made me at the time. And that name was Inter Toronto FC. And
and the team in the United States is following that blueprint.
Is Inter Nashville FC.
Of course. There's a lot of similarities between Nashville and Milan, Duane.
I know.
When you think about Nashville, you think about pastas, about cheese, about fashion. Yeah, it's very similar.
Yeehaw.
Yeehaw, Inter.
Look, I mean, at least when Toronto was naming it, the argument was that there was such a large Italian population here in the city of Toronto that it might allow them to track that. But of course,
but you alienate everybody else that's a fan of other teams from Italy. So
I prefer AC Milan myself, and I don't really have an Italian team, but I do have a soft spot for AC Milan. So, if I was a little more intense about it, I would have been like, no, I'm not supporting them, right? Like, come on, and the it was just seriously stupid. However, I guess Nashville disagrees, and I think this is probably a case that this name's been bulking around for a while, and just suddenly and eventually someone was going to use it because we're running out of teams to be
running out of names. We're running out of names.
I know the funniest thing, and I've told this story before. There's 2 minutes left in the segment. I'll do this right now, and with apologies to, he's a lovely fella from the Midwest, and I'm not going to say his name now, but a staffer on Kansas City. Was very excited. He used to talk to me a lot. Kansas City was the first Major League Soccer team outside of Toronto to follow me on Twitter and to sort of interact with me on Twitter. Salt Lake City's been a long time now. RSL's been that as well for a while. So I have a bit of a connection to their social media staff over the years because I've talked to them off record and on record and everything else. So anyway, the Sporting Kansas City guy tweets me very excited about the pending name change for what's now Sporting Kansas City. They're the Wizards at the time. And he goes, I got to tell you about this. I'm going to keep it off record. Yeah, okay, keep it off record. He tells me, and I go cold when I hear it. Sporting Kansas City, really? Like, what the hell do you have to do with Lisbon? And then they all got like, well, no, this is a brilliant idea. I was told, the owner here, he actually wants to make it a sporting club. And they said this publicly as well, but they said this to me privately off the line. And I just started to laugh when they said this to them. I ended up meeting this guy for a drink at MLS Cup in 2010. Yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to create this and this. And the one thing that always stuck to me, and this is where this joke comes from, if you followed me long enough, you'll see me do this every so often, is they said that they're going to have, I don't know, a women's lacrosse team. They're going to make it a true sporting club. Yeah, I'm still waiting for that women's lacrosse team. It's just derivative to Sporting Lisbon.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. But no, it's yeah. So the Inter Nashville FC, we'll see if that happens.
Yeah, and I don't think they're going to, yeah. It's also the international part of that. Is Nashville an international city? If you're Nashville,
it has an international airport. Does that count?
Look, I've been to Nashville very briefly. I haven't been to Nashville in any way that I can really say that I've experienced it. But I do know people that have spent a considerable amount of time in that city. And one of the things that they love about that city, and they do, it's a city that constantly comes up as a place that you should go and spend time in, is that it's authentic. It's a place that is comfortable in its own clothes and comfortable being itself. And it's Nashville. Yeehaw, they'll be happy with that because that's who they are. That's a city that believes in itself and believes in its image and all that. For God's sakes, own that then. If you're going to name a soccer team there, don't something that you're not, which is what that name is, right? Anyway, that's my final thought on that.
Yep.
All right, let's take a quick break and then let's get back to talking about
series of the decade. The series of the decade. You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS postgame show, open lines after dark, 5 rings daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
And we're back. It's almost time for new bumpers again, Kevin. It's we usually do it at the end of each year. So that'll
in
be
the
exciting.
off season, I'll work on that, and we'll probably keep a few of them because there has become some Soccer Today classic. I'm not touching the intro. That is something that will stay for a long time, I believe. But we will have a new audio color, as we like to call it.
There you go. All right.
Probably during the MLS Cup, we're trying to figure out something, and we'll have a lot of few guests, and I'm bringing the actual entire studio, so maybe we're gonna have time to do some voiceovers with some familiar voices.
Yeah, we could do the you're listening to Soccer Today.
Exactly. Hi, I'm blank. You're listening to Soccer Today.
There you go. All right, let's talk about this then, Kevin, and let's start. We're going to get into in the second block today. After we open the lines, and if anyone comes in and has a question, we'll be happy to take it at that point. But we'll get into the more technical side of the game then. But for now, I want to focus more on the outside stuff because that is, in many ways, as a longtime TFC observer and fan, as a longtime Impact observer and fan for Kevin's perspective, obviously the game matters a lot and the technical stuff matters a lot and it's important to us, but let's face facts. To the vast majority of people that watched that game, absorbed that game, to the 1.4 million people on average that watched it on TSN, it was about the spectacle. It was about the event. It was about the crowd. It was about all of that sort of stuff. And so we'll start there because that is important to sort of go outside our bubble and to talk about that a little bit. Well, what does it mean? What does it mean for Canadian soccer? And it is an interesting debate. If you're more inclined to be cynical about such things, you'll point out the fact that, only 10% of the players' minutes that played in the game were Canadian players. That really does it matter beyond Toronto and Montreal? All of those questions. And look, I was listening to the show Tim and Sid the other day, which is a prominent Canadian broadcast show here. It's kind of funny and irreverent and youthful, sort of oriented stuff. It's pop culture focused. It's on every night on TV at 5:00. I was watching them, and they're both soccer fans. And what they said in this, they compared it directly to Vince Carter here with the Raptors. And if you're not from Toronto, you may not get that reference instantly, but you probably know who Vince Carter was. When Vince Carter came to the Raptors in the late part of the 90s, early part of the 2000s, the Raptors at that time were an afterthought. Not an afterthought, but they were a team that wasn't necessarily even the basketball fans in Toronto's first team. They still held on to their old teams, like, Lakers fans or Celtics fans or whatever, and they'd go to Raptors games to watch the away team, basically. They didn't inspire a lot of people, and basketball was still pretty peripheral in Canada. But Vince Carter changed all that. He changed it in the sense that it became the cool team in Toronto. It became, younger people dropped, whoever their father's team was, their mother's team was, to support the Raptors and became Raptors fans. And that eventually led to what we see now, where the Raptors are arguably within the city proper, not extending to the suburbs, but within the city proper, they're arguably as popular as the Leafs now. They're as popular as the Blue Jays now. They are every bit as part of the sporting landscape in this city as any team, and they're massive in terms of the numbers that they'll get in a playoff run and so on and so forth. That this game could have been Toronto FC's equivalent, and I'm sure the same might apply in Montreal when they have a little less competition in that market, but certainly it would help them push them up to a closer level to the Habs, and that's an important part when you're talking about making a team part of a community, making a team part of the sporting landscape of a city. And I think that we saw that happen. And one last thought before I'll let Kevin jump in. There's an inspirational effect to it, and this is where it could benefit Canadian soccer, and where I already see evidence of MLS in general having already benefited Canadian soccer, and that inspirational side, in that there are more players that grow up dreaming of being soccer players, dreaming of playing in their hometown club, which in turn makes them domestic focused. The Canadian national team is a natural extension of it then, as opposed to an abstract thought, which it often was before. Kevin, your thoughts?
Oh, it's crazy. And look at it in hindsight. In 2015, 2016, including Montreal and Toronto, but maybe more Montreal, 60,000 crowds more than once, 30,000, 40,000 crowds at the Big O for regular season games. Of course, there were smaller ones. Stade Saputo, one of the stadiums in top 5 of attendance this season. Montreal's a soccer city, and the potential is maybe even bigger. You don't get the Habs. Yeah, they would have an arena with 30,000, 40,000. Maybe they would get some games filled. But you got the Olympic Stadium. That's a cold, hard fact. Filled multiple times over the last 2 years. The growth of the game, basically, or the growth of the coverage, the growth of the awareness, the importance given to the club, the league, it has exponentially grown over the last 2 years. And it came to moments like this. Imagine Osorio, the Patrice Bernier, who played in this game from Canada. Bernier representing his hometown, his home area. And it's big for him. That's what he kept saying. This is top 5 important game in his career, if not maybe the most important game in a lot of those players' career. And it was that series. It's almost 100,000 people over 2 games in Canada to watch 2 Canadian teams battling to have a shot to win it all in North American soccer. It is quite impressive when you think about it. And the atmosphere on both sides of it were crazy. It even tops, maybe because I have some emotions involved, but it tops Azteca in my mind. It was that crazy. Both had a different feel to it. And in Toronto, Duane, I was telling you off air, the oohs and ahs of the crowd, the live reaction to the game, the knowledge of the game on both sides of the equation in Montreal and in Toronto, the reaction of the crowd, the anticipation of the moment coming back, the ebb and flow of a game with momentum, like it was both ways, because in Montreal, 3-0, and boom, 3-2 was a feeling of defeat heading in after that. And in this game, you had roller coaster emotion. It was, hands down, the best 2 soccer games I have ever seen when you consider everything that happened.
Yeah, no, it was insane. Like, I mean, that it has to go down into, there is, as I said, I think I said this on the show already, or maybe it was on Jason Davis's show that I mentioned it, I'm not sure. There's a famous game in MLS history between the Earthquakes and the Galaxy, in which the Galaxy got a big lead, and the Earthquakes came back to win it, or may have been the other way around. Whatever, it was 5-4 was the final. At any rate, that's always held up as the pinnacle of games in Major League Soccer playoffs. This one, we're going to need a little hindsight to rank it truly, as you do in any game, but I'd have to predict right now that just from a pure neutral perspective, forget the Canadian aspect of it, it's going to rank among the top 3 or 4 games ever played. And so when I say games, I'm talking about the entire game.
Yeah.
So ties, yeah,
including the lines. It's the line being painted. It feels like an eternity ago, but it all started like this craziness. And it doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. That's what makes it beautiful. And the fact that both teams, tactics went out the window. You just played the damn game, and it was beautiful to see on both sides. Even though Montreal fell short 7-5, we'll talk about the tactics of it later. The sheer emotion shown by everybody involved in the game, going after it on both sides, leaving everything they have on that pitch, it just added to the atmosphere, that added to the importance, the coverage. On my walk to BMO Field before the game, I was silent. I was awestruck. The importance of the moment really got to me, and I had a feeling of, wow, it cannot be anything else but special, and special it was.
Yeah, no doubt. And from a Toronto perspective, you tie in the 10 years of history and frustration around that, and it played it. I'll tell you what, the one thing it reminded me of, as a longtime observer of Canadian sports, across multiple platforms, I'm going to go outside the soccer genre here to do the only playoff series that I can recall that sort of met this in my mind, and that's going way back to when the Nordiques existed and they played the Habs in the playoffs. That kind of intensity has not really been seen since then, in my mind, between two Canadian cities in a playoff series. With apologies to the Battle of Alberta and well, there's not even another equivalent out there, really. To me, this is the closest thing that we've had for an all-Canadian matchup since those days when Quebec and Montreal would play in the playoffs and brawl each other. Yeah. There obviously weren't any fights, but it's sort of the intensity and the sort of passion and how much it mattered to each city, not only to win it, but to not lose to them. Yeah. Find me a better comparison. I'm not sure they can.
I know. Even though it's a 6-hour difference, this felt like a true derby. It felt like a Two Solitudes derby. Teams are sick of playing each other. It was 7 times this season, way too much. But you do have some ill will that builds up over those 7 games. Yeah. That you do have repercussion. The Altador, Giovinco, and it's interesting how both Giovinco and Piatti were instrumental and were not in those 2 games. It fell to other players, and we'll talk about this later. But it does add to a moment, because teams, you fall into a pattern of needing to do something to cover that team, and you think that's the only thing you could do. Toronto for blocking Piatti, Montreal blocking Giovinco. Turns out that if you do this, something else happens. So it is fascinating that it's a game that's been built up, a game that happened because of everything else that happened in the last 7 games between the 2 teams.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you play, forget the geographical and historical and cultural rivalry between the 2 cities, which just adds to it. Obviously, you put the Sporting Kansas City and Real Salt Lake. No, that's bad. They're both coming. Let's say the Earthquakes. The Earthquakes and Sporting Kansas City. If they played each other 7 times, I guarantee you by the 7th game, it would seem like a rivalry, right? That alone adds to the drama of the day.
Well, you just felt it. Example: Montreal playing Columbus last year in the playoff, and playing often teams like the Red Bull because of Champions League. You do have a rivalry building with those teams because things happen with Felipe. We'll talk about the Felipe comments maybe later, but you do see a rivalry building between teams that just play often. So add everything else to it. This is I'll go on record now, the biggest rivalry in North American soccer.
Yeah, no, I believe that as well. You're absolutely right on that other front too. Like, I think 10 years in, it's only been in the last few years that it's kind of like teams like DC United and the Red Bulls and the Rebs or whatever, when they come into BMO, it feels like something different than when the Western teams come in. Like, it used to be in the first few seasons, it didn't matter. Like, the teams were interchangeable. It was just like Ben Knight used to say in the podcast, it was like, McDonald's franchises coming to play each other. But it doesn't feel like that anymore, because they played each other so much in so many competitions over the years. The Eastern Conference teams, especially the Eastern Conference teams that have been there since the start of TFC, you do sort of get that rivalry. I want to change the subject a little bit to end this segment and just talk about Montreal a bit more in terms of where the impact fit in the cultural and sort of sporting landscape in that city now. And to me, having gone to a lot of Expos games as a kid, the Expos games were fun, and because they were in the National League, the Blue Jays were in the American League, I cheered for the Expos. But the Expos never felt like a complete Montreal team to me. They had Francophone support, but I think that the Impact are a team that does a better job of reaching all aspects of the city of Montreal. They feel like a better representation of the city of Montreal than even the Habs in some ways.
No, not in some ways and always. The difference of this club is the people's club. That's what it feels like, because maybe of the NASL and USL days, maybe because of that grassroots support that grew over the year and people fell in love with the club at all different levels for all different reasons. And now you get moments that galvanizes the fan base, and people are not afraid now and not necessarily shunned upon when they're saying, oh, I'm a soccer fan first, and then I might like the Habs, but my team is not the Habs to start with. It is a representation. It is a more colorful, a more multicultural, diversity-filled fan base, and more accepted in all those aspects to being a fan. You like soccer? Well, you're welcome here. And that's maybe more the case, maybe because of ticket prices, maybe because of the accessibility of the club, more of the players. Maybe you do have that. This represents the city in 2016 right now, and not what it used to be.
Yeah. No, real quickly. I just, from my interactions with Impact fans on Twitter, who have been great to me in the last week or so, they've been pretty
respectful. Both sides, I have to say. I have great stories, and of course, there's going to be some beer thrown and the fringes between the trenches. It does get dirty sometimes, but as a whole, it was pretty respectful on both sides.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, I was going to say just the divide of the type of Impact fans that talk to me. It seems like a pretty even English-French divide too. Like it represents both communities pretty equally, and I think that's kind of something that's important. And nowadays, we want sports to bring people together, not take them apart, right? So there you go. All right, Kevin, let's take the break. We'll come back and we'll get a little more tactical about things.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
Boom, boom, boom. And by the way, if you want to give us a call, 802-375-7445. We do have one line open, so give us a call.
All right. If you don't, that's fine too. But by all means, give us a talk. We'll open the lines a few more times next week. When we started this show, that was intended to be a call-in show. As you build an audience, you'll find that people are shy. So we kind of pulled back from that to establish the audience a little bit more. But I think in the days ahead, we'll try and get a little more fan interaction going on, as I said in the first segment. Kevin, let's get to the actual game itself. It seems like forever ago that the Impact were up 3-0 in this series. I tell you, though, for the first 65 minutes of the series, it was all Impact. Before we get into what went wrong, just any quick thoughts on what went right in that first 60 minutes and why that couldn't have continued moving forward?
It was a combination of Toronto not wanting to open up more, of Montreal being able to take advantage of the space given by the three-man backline, combination with not necessarily the turf, but the way Montreal plays on that surface. They do take advantage of it. So you have those aspects of the game involved. You do have Dominic Gaudreau. It's something I say a lot about the Montreal Impact team, seizing the moment on the pitch where a ball might bounce in a different way. You're not used to it, but you find an open and find some guy and he goes on a run and you finish it. The opportunist aspect of Montreal has been key in the playoffs and the amount of goals they scored this season, especially in the run up to the playoff and in the playoffs. So you have that the unpredictable aspect of a game going your way. Not that it's luck, but you take advantage of situation and you're clinical and you finish situations. We've seen this from Montreal in the first 65 minutes in the Big O. And we've seen this at some point as well in Toronto. And it was the aspect of not what went wrong is not being able to cover on set pieces, on crosses in. And it's the same two players that are responsible for first 3 Toronto goals, which Yeah, they were not the ones that technically eliminated Montreal. They were the ones in overtime and in a crazy panicking situation. But they led to the downfall of Montreal still.
Yeah, look, I think that the one goal, and I had such a great view of it that I can't help but bring this one up. It was Hagelin's goal, the goal that sent it into extra time. And obviously at that point in time, I got to say, for the 10 minutes that followed Montreal getting the second goal, that was the only time during the game where I felt that the crowd lost hope. I don't think we saw it coming back. It seemed like same old, same old. But when as soon as the ball left the foot,
and Hagelin jumped twice the height of Donadel, who Donadel didn't even jump, didn't even try to go for the ball. It seemed like, and after Hagelin knocked it in, that's at 68th minute, you had Donadel just realizing, oh no, it was my man. I messed up. Just hands on the face and realizing that if it stays that way, they're going to overtime. It's now equal on both sides on goals and on goals away. So it was a great moment. And Hagelin went up for that ball. And I want to talk about the Giovinco assist and Altidore goal, the second TFC goal, Duane.
Beautiful goal.
Yes,
that was the goal of the tie. But yeah,
why is there anybody on the near post from Montreal when you know you're having trouble on corners and set pieces? Why is nobody covering? Especially that the first goal, Bernardello blocks it off the line before if I can remember who finishes it, but before somebody else finishes it. So you know you're having trouble on set pieces. You have somebody on the far post. Put somebody on the front post, on the near post. Jeez. And if there's somebody there, there's no holes for that ball to go in.
Well, I'll say what I noticed on the set piece stuff is that they were not immediately off the set pieces, right? The Toronto FC was trying all kinds of short corners on the night. They were trying to work the ball.
Well, they were the movement, Duane. It's the movement of TFC. The seconds prior to the ball has been kicked on all goals that were scored off set pieces or corners. Montreal were left static, leaving Toronto able to take advantage of the blind spot with runs and created the direct goals. The Altidore goal, the Hagelin goal. It's all runs and movement off set pieces that Montreal were caught static on.
Yeah, which has to suggest to me that Toronto FC's video department picked something up from the first game, that they saw something in how Montreal was defending those set pieces that they were able to utilize, to take advantage of it. And obviously, and that's why, like, to me, you notice it, like, if you talk about the Altidore Giovinco goal, which was Giovinco's best moment of that series too. He actually, if you see the replay, if you've watched it since,
he goes say to him, yeah.
They talk to each other for a half second.
Yeah.
And obviously he's saying what he's going to do at that point, and the run is perfect and the execution is even better.
He probably says, okay, it's that time. It's time to do what we practiced 2 days ago.
And there was a play earlier in too as well, when we should have picked up. Well, I did pick up at the stadium this one, that it was going to be a short corner as well, when Cooper just laid it off and Giovinco put it flat on the ground to the top of the 18. Josie flubbed the shot. That was early in the first half, but that clearly was another play that they were working on, and Josie was open. It could have been a goal. It could have been a significant scoring chance as well that time as well. So clearly they were working on stuff that had to emulate from the observations that they would have picked up from the video. And Montreal just wasn't able to adjust on the game on the day. Now, let's be honest here, though, from a Toronto perspective, as much as the series did end 7-5, the series ended after 180 at 5-5. So in many ways, it was very equal, and it was Toronto took advantage of the home advantage.
Yeah, and Montreal pushed as far as they could, if you look at it that way. Outside of winning, this is the furthest you could go.
Yeah, as I said, in the 30 minutes, if you rewatch that overtime period, the extra time period, Montreal had zero. They had no legs at that point, and they just were unable. It really comes out on the replay when you watch it. When you watch it with sober mind and literal soberness in some cases, you are able to see just how much Toronto was outright, particularly Altidore, who just was a beast in that extra time. That turn he made.
Yeah, in the extra time, the entire game, basically. The beast, we'll talk about the contact with Bernardello and how Bernardello was subbed off at halftime, and how we wonder how he was able to come back after 30, when he got hit at the 30th minute anyways. Apparently, Duane, according to Marbiello after the game, he passed all concussion protocol. Thank you. And he passed all of them. He knew where he was, what was our score, what was the game, what happened. But apparently it's his shoulder that was bothering him at halftime. And Venegas, which was probably the only impactful player they had off the bench in this game and the possibility of it, he came in and was instrumental in the Montreal second goal of Piatti. He's the one that recuperates the ball, gives it to Piatti. Piatti walks in and the ball bounces, and it's probably an own goal, but still it's Piatti that created that as a situation. Venegas is the only impactful player Montreal had off the bench. When you look at Toronto, they had more than one. And that basically was the difference. Maybe not Giroux. Giroux hadn't scored all year, and the fact that he scored in that moment because it's pure luck and coincidence. But that player that's impactful off the bench, Montreal at that point in that game didn't have anyone left on the bench, and that's where probably now the fact that Didier Drogba's career is done with the Montreal Impact, he might go play one more or two more seasons with maybe an African club, maybe somewhere else to bring awareness to African soccer. That's what he mentioned to European reporters in the last few days. But when you look at Montreal with the Zemaili being quote unquote confirmed by La Presse today as well, being the new DP for Montreal in June for a 2.5 season, you will have a team maybe built on not superstar like a Drogba, and I don't think this team was built for Drogba anyways, but to add to a Mancosu, a Zemaili, and maybe another important, impactful player off the bench is what Montreal needs to get to the next level. Because let's face it, Montreal might be old and might be going into not a important off season. They will have some changes to the roster, but the core, the identity, the way this team is built probably is going to carry over to next year.
Yeah, no, I actually have a greater degree of respect and hope for the Impact next year based on some of the stuff they did in the second half to allow them. They do need to get younger. I think there's no doubt about that, but they do have some pieces in play that I think could give them another shot to go deep next year as well, particularly if the DP that they bring in, sorry, the name again has escaped me off the top of my head.
Zemaili.
Yeah, thank you. You just said it. I know that, but mine's going 12 places here right now. Yeah, particularly if he's effective coming in, that can allow them and to take advantage of Piatti, what might be his last season in MLS as well. That I think it's important that Montreal build for that and get a little bit younger at the same time. A couple thoughts that you even brought up there. The concussion protocol thing's getting a lot of attention right now. If he did in fact pass everything on the field, I don't know what more you could ask. I think it just is another illustration of how you need a neutral doctor out there that makes those calls when it comes to concussions and when it comes to head injuries, because I think too often we need to take that stuff seriously, but I think too often we all become, we all went to med school suddenly when we watch a player on the field, and sometimes maybe they did just hit their head.
That's true. That's true. But having covered mixed martial art and boxing in my years, I did see some signs for Maranello when he was just hit and laying on the floor, on the ground, on the pitch, on the grass. He was a stiff, and that does, if you look at his hands, and there's some sign that doesn't lie. Apparently he was fine, and it's his shoulder. We'll see. Hopefully he is fine. But it is something to keep an eye for in the next few days or month to see if actually it was a shoulder injury. And take it for what it is. I'm not a doctor, not at all. And it might have been just his shoulder, and we're speculating here. And that's what, but according to the team, it was a shoulder injury. That was why he was subbed off from Venegas in starting the second half. Yeah,
well, and as dumb as this is going to sound, we're only 6 weeks away from the preseason, right? 6 or 7 weeks.
52 days now, or 53, in the 50, early 50s, the amount of days until training camp opens, and around 95 days until the first game of the season next year.
Yeah, I'm used to TFC seasons ending in early October, so this is a bit of a change for me. At any rate, barely going to breathe before we have 2017 coming right at us. But
at least it gives us a short off season here.
It's going to be very short, 4 weeks in Toronto FC's case. That's insane. Anyway, to get this to Toronto FC for that there. Yeah, you mentioned the subs, and I said this on the United States of Soccer when I appeared yesterday, and I'll repeat it here now. It's that, to me, what obviously Giovinco has carried this team for the better part of a year and a half, but it is a mistake to call this a Giovinco-only team now, and this is clearly evident in the fact that they scored 7 goals in this playoff tie against Montreal, and none were by Giovinco. He's had a hat trick in the New York City FC series, so he got his goals there, but 7 goals, none by Giovinco, and they scored 2 goals in extra time after Giovinco had been subbed off with what they're calling a cramp. That's knock on wood and hope that that is the case. He was at the end of the game. He did celebrate in front of the South End supporters, and he was jumping and moving pretty freely at that point. So it does seem like he's okay. That said, it's the depth of Toronto, I think, that has really made the difference in this playoff run. That
those 2-3 players. It's a 2-player difference, probably. After 180 minutes, they made a difference. It's Ricketts and Giroux. Let's look at it. It's those 2 players particularly, but it's the idea of those 2 players, the concept of those impactful bench players that are used to coming in and understand their role and do it with motivation, and not just having a strong starting 11, but a strong starting 18.
Yeah, Giroux is. Name me anyone who wants to dismiss Toronto FC as a deep team. Name me another team in Major League Soccer that can pull Benoit Giroux off the bench in a stoppage time. That can pull Will Johnson off the bench in the first leg to try and solidify things. And Jonathan Osorio. These are all guys that would start on most Major League Soccer teams. And Ricketts, I think Ricketts' role is as a sub. He's been brought in to be a sub, and he has performed that role brilliantly. And added with him and Osorio, they have added a Canadian content to TFC in this run that is nice to see. Yeah. Both of them have had roles in the playoffs. Osorio with 2 goals. Ricketts obviously with just 2 or 3. I'm trying to think. It's off the top of my head. He scored at least 2 in the playoffs, including the one that salted the tie away this past week, and that was when that ball went in, man. Anyway,
well, and if you look at it, Montreal has that player. He's just been injured for 18 months now, and that's Andres Romero. The fact that he had setback in his rehab. That player is exactly what Montreal needed. Somebody that can work for Oduro or before Oduro. So when Oduro comes in, you do see the way he plays in the first 60 minutes of game. He was pacing himself and he was playing well over the 80th and 90th minute. But imagine if he comes in a different position. The Andres Romero injury that took longer to rehab than earlier anticipated. He is that player that Montreal were missing at that exact moment in that game. That type of player, strong on the ball, coming, not being afraid, getting hands dirty, well, feet dirty in that instance. He was the type of player that Montreal needed, and unfortunately, because of injuries for a year and a half now, he hasn't been able. So that was the type of player that Montreal needed, and that is something that may be looking forward to next year. Hopefully, we'll see what happens if he's back with the club or if he moves on or whatever. But Andres Romero, that type of player, that type of physical presence as well, because Montreal got physically dominated by one player, Altidore, and we'll talk about him probably next. But you do have that sense that Montreal needed Romero or that concept of a player in that moment to come off the bench or to be involved with the team, and they only have Venegas, which did his job and performed maybe its best 2 match in Montreal Impact uniform after that great performance against the United States, which probably gave him the confidence heading going to forward and probably a bigger role with the club if he stays for the club for next year. But the physical presence that Romero would have brought would have been really helpful at that moment for the Montreal Impact.
Fair enough. Yeah. You mentioned Altidore real quick. We'll take the break after this. I don't know what more to say. He was clearly the most valuable player of these 2 games in terms of his influence on the pitch, in terms of his physicality, everything that Josie Altidore was supposed to bring as a DP, every criticism of the money being quote unquote wasted. I think it's at the window now. He earned every penny that he will ever earn in the TFC uniform in those 2 games. And I don't think there's anyone in this city that's complaining about Josie Altidore being a DP anymore. No one remembers. What was that guy that's in Sunderland's name now?
Who? Jay?
Defoe? Is that anyway? Yeah.
Oh, Lefort.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's take a break. We'll come back. I want to turn their attention to the Impact season in general.
You are listening to SPN Radio, powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
And welcome back. I want to thank the Ottawa fan that thrust the Ottawa Fury scarf at me at the end of the Montreal first leg as a thank you. So I have an Ottawa Fury scarf here now, and appreciate that a great deal. So thanks very much.
Very cool. I don't have scarves falling out of the sky for me, never. But that's kind of cool.
So there you go.
Somebody trying to give me a towel of TFC, and I kind of was like, nah, it's fine.
The towels look like they're cute, actually. They look like little uniforms. I have about 6 of them around the house right now. But anyway, because people kept handing me those too. They were free. So, a little less of a gift there. But anyway, let's turn our attention away from TFC because we'll have all week to talk about them a little bit more. But the Impact, I think we do need to celebrate their season as well.
Yeah.
I'm not a Toronto fan that is bitter against the Impact, as you know. So I can say this freely. They really, without the Impact's presence in this tie, it isn't no one is talking about TFC beating New York City FC 7-0 as a great MLS tie of all time. Right, you need the opponent putting the valuable charge up to ultimately defeat, but certainly inglorious defeat, like the Impact did, and we got to give them the respect that they deserve as a club and for what they did in this series and in the year in general. So I thought I'd give Kevin an opportunity to sort of talk about some highs and lows for the Impact's season right now, and we'll also look at Drogba a little bit because obviously that is a story as well. Kevin, let's just start there. Putting the playoff series aside, what were a couple highs of the season for you in your mind for the Impact?
The run up to the playoff themselves, all through the season, that confidence when they play on the road, don't care about what anybody says on the road. When you're on the road and you're not supposed to, taking advantage of game situation. Mauro Biello doing some great work, finding a starting 11, using it during the season, going through different competition and be able to manage some difficult moments for the club during the season, and manage a lot of drama as well. It's never easy in Montreal. It's always filled with drama in any sports in Montreal. And we do have with Didier Drogba at the beginning of the season with the Chelsea rumors, and closer than we think of him going to coach there, and through him coming back as a player in the middle of July, finding that he still loves to play. He did have some great games. We're not going to forget the hat-trick against Philly this season, few hat-trick last year. The club moving forward from Drogba as a player during a few different instances this season, players performing on the pitch, made it difficult for Mauro Biello to find the best players. Like a difficult decision when you have to put a player like Drogba on the bench instead of starting him. And those decisions were made by Mauro Biello. Mauro Biello, first season as a head coach in Major League Soccer. We cannot say anything else, but it was a success for him. Even though at some point Vanny had the upper hand in the final, but he had maybe more chess piece. It's all about what you have and what you can do with it. And Montreal, they did the best that they could at every position with what they had. Duane, Oyongo, the emergence of Ambrose Oyongo as one of the best left or right back, depending on game situation and starting 11 in the league. Having him, the way he was, it was the one creative spark in that game against Toronto on Wednesday. It was going through him and then Piatti and then somewhere else. But that link-up play of Oyongo and Piatti, we've seen the emergence of this season. Hopefully it stays the same for next year. But you do have a lot of great quote-unquote storylines in the Montreal Impact roster. Laurent Simon having less yellows and red cards this year than last year, finding his groove in Major League Soccer, being effective at the regular point, having the national team call up now and being a key player for Belgium. That confidence carried through the playoffs. He does get burned sometimes, but the way he comes back and clears it, it's always spectacular. And we've seen this in the Eastern Conference Final too. Montreal Impact did what was for them to do to go as far as they could this season. And that is maybe influenced by Mauro Biello. So I do have a great amount of respect for what Mauro Biello did in his first season as a head coach.
Yeah, look, not to belabor the Drogba drama, and Drogba certainly added a ton of narrative to this season, both positively and negatively. Biello standing up to Drogba down the stretch and that little bit before the playoffs, that I think turned into a positive for them in the sense that Biello was able to establish himself as the coach. The management stood behind him. That maybe in the past you wouldn't necessarily have expected that, and I think that was a vital growth moment for him as a coach. As you mentioned, just his first year. I think we all want to see Canadian coaches, Quebec coaches, succeed in this league, and Biello to do that, to stand up to a legend like that. It was a very brave decision for a first-year head coach.
And Duane, I know you were busy post-game on Wednesday, but I was able to watch on Facebook Live the MLSsoccer.com's post-game. But Dax McCarthy, player of the New York Rebels, mentioned that for him, Mauro Biello is if not one of the top 3 best head coach in Major League Soccer. He was praising Mauro Biello and the decision and the way he was able to adjust your roster, adjust your team so you get the most amount of result with it. If you have to play the counter and defensive to win, you do this. And if you talk about the old identity of the Montreal Impact back in the NASL and USL days and early MLS, the counter was not what Montreal wanted. They wanted to play a good soccer. Now they do what they have to win. And Mauro Biello was able to do this in his first season as a head coach, manage that roster, build that roster, work your tactics around your roster to make sure that you can highlight your strength and hide your weakness. And unfortunately, they were able all across the season to hide their weakness on set pieces, which we all knew. And it's been since I've been following the Impact in the mid 2000s, they have been vulnerable in set pieces. That's was used to be part of the identity. And at the end of the day, that's what came back to bite them. But Mauro Biello, as a coach, was able to highlight the strength of this team, especially down the stretch, and hide their weaknesses.
Every team in the world wants to play beautifully. But if every team in the world could play beautifully, every game in the world would be El Clasico, and then El Clasico wouldn't be special.
By the way, and El Clasico, that's tomorrow.
There's my El Clasico reference.
10 a.m. tomorrow on BN Sports.
Yeah, there you go. And we'll talk a bit about that stuff on next week. But it's hard, I think most people will accept that this is where our attention should be right now. At any rate.
Yeah, and next week you're gonna get a lot of MLS Cup coverage, and that's our bread and butter, and that's what we build everything on. But in the off season, we'll have plenty of time to focus on our internationally.
Yes, exactly. All right. It's 4 minutes left, so that's turn our attention a little bit to the lows. Let's not focus on the negatives today. Let's talk about Drogba and his overall legacy.
He's actually speaking right now in the Montreal Impact postmortem. So Drogba is there. We'll give a sum up of the postmortem of the Impact next week. We'll watch it later. But you have Drogba highs and lows, of course. But if you look at the stats, Duane, okay, let's just statistically look. Here's 33 game played for Montreal over the last 2 seasons, playoff included. 27 games started, 21 goals, 7 assists, 137 shots, 56 on target. So it's still not bad. And if you look at Drogba's play before joining the Impact, very similar stats. Drogba actually tried. He played. He did his best, even when he didn't want to. This season, still had 10 goals. And yes, tactically, maybe the way the team was set up was not necessarily as efficient as last year when he came in, like, okay, what can we do? Just give the ball to DJ. And this year was a little different. But he still managed to get 10 goals this year, 11 last year, for 21 in his Montreal Impact career. He was successful on and off the pitch. And I think the positive outweighs a lot of the quote-unquote negatives or drama or interference that Drogba could or had this season.
Yeah, look, Drogba, like any superstar, has an ego, and that ego came out at times. I think that it's in everyone's best interest that Drogba has chosen to move on at this point, because I think it would have been quite the distraction had he been back for another season in Montreal, because obviously I think we've discovered that his best contribution down the stretch was as a bench player, and that's not something that he's interested in, and fair enough. So he moves on, and as you said, the plan apparently, well, he mentioned something about Italy. I think that might have been him dreaming a little bit, or sort of putting the feeler out there if there's any club in Italy that wants him to play. But by and large, I suspect he'll be back, probably playing in Africa somewhere, and that'll be good for African club football. Speaking of which, Club World Cup coming up soon. So African club football, the only club outside of Europe and South America to make the final of that tournament. We'll cover that when it happens. But I think that would be a good place for him. I think back to that day he arrived in the airport. And in many ways, that couldn't have been gotten higher. That has to be the high water mark in many ways. And I don't say that negatively, just because that showed how important that was for people for a star of Drogba's stature to come to Montreal and put his stamp of approval on the Impact. That was a moment, I think, that most people can understand and appreciate. Was a moment that for a team like Montreal that kind of are always outsiders in many ways. They're outsiders in Canada. They're outsiders in MLS because they're Canadian, right? So for him comes in there, he puts his approval on that. I think that mattered a lot to the fans, and that's why they stayed loyal to him, even when there were some things that maybe should have had him be booed a little bit, right? I get that. And I think that was probably his biggest contribution, was just he made the impact legit in a lot of people's minds. And you can't discount that, Kevin.
No, and he made it, like, even in the future for new players coming in. You're coming into a team that Drogba played for. And Drogba being a top 5 name in the last 20, 30 years in the world of football across the globe, putting his quote-unquote stamp of approval, and hopefully it doesn't get sour from here on out. And when he moves on, hopefully the club has come to an agreement that, look, even though we had our differences at some point, we're both going to speak highly of each other. It's beneficial for both of us. Maybe that is the way that it's going to happen. Maybe that conversation between Joey and Didier had that as a resolution, hopefully. But that does give more enticement for player to come. Look, I'm not going to a place that it's nowhere. I'm going to play for a club that is relevant and that is impactful, quote unquote, not only in their market, but in the continent.
At the end of the final thought on the night, at the end of the night in the Toronto dressing room, just quietly there by the side, and this is coming from Rudy Schuler, because I, as Kevin said, was quote unquote busy at the end of the game. So I didn't go into the dressing room. It's not my gig. I don't cover as a beat at any rate. But Torsten Frings was there, is the point I'm making. Torsten Frings, of course, was a DP here in Toronto. Didn't necessarily have the best run in Toronto. Most people would assume, based on how his career ended here, some people suggest that he was maybe forced out at the end to make some room in the salary cap and so forth. So most people would assume that maybe he didn't have the fondest memories of this team. But since that time, he's always spoke highly of TFC when he's had a chance to. He's come back a couple times a year, and he was there on the biggest night of the year. Danny Koevermans is another DP that comes back all the time to Toronto. And I think that having that history and having that connection to past players is important. And hopefully for Impact fans and for the Impact down the line, there will come a day in a big Impact playoff match when Drogba will just show up quietly and watch the game and be part of a club that he is part of the history of.
I don't expect DJ Drogba to play for an alumni game from the Impact, but that could be possible that he shows up for a big game for the club, absolutely.
And that would be nice, and that's people really appreciate that when Koevermans comes into the stands in Toronto. I'll tell you that. Like, Koevermans watched a game in the South End after he retired, and that was something that mattered a lot to the fans. Frings comes back and watches. He's a huge Blue Jays fan. That's part of the reason he comes back. But he came back for this game, and when people found out that, they really appreciate that as well, and that matters to the fans, because they don't want to be seen as just a place where people are coming to get paychecks. And it, again, not to belabor this, but if Frings is coming back to watch his former club play in what is clearly the biggest game of its history, that means that it wasn't just a paycheck to him, that he does have an attraction and an affiliation and an affinity for the city and the club that he played for. Kevin?
Yep.
That's going to end it for today. As I said, we will figure out next week's schedule. We'll let you know on all our various social media platforms as that goes. There probably will be extra shows. Don't know exactly the schedule just yet, but lots of talk, lots of Toronto FC talk, lots of Seattle talk, lots of MLS Cup talk. We'll get it all going next week. But until that time, Kevin, I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to hand it over to you to say goodbye, as always.
It's going to start Monday at 11 a.m., and we will talk about the schedule then. For sure, we will be present at the MLS Cup with, like Duane said, bonus coverage, surprise guest. We will have a lot of fun. Unfortunately, if you're a Montreal fan, it's not what it could have been, but we'll make it for what it is. And until then, have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.